All right, before we get started, or maybe as we get started, Carlos can welcome us in. I'm going to put into the chat a Slido. If you're not familiar with that, it is basically like Padlet. It's a question and answer forum that if you come up with questions that you want to ask the panel, you can type them in there. We are also going to be flexible and you can unmute yourself if you'd like to talk. But we'll have, we'll let you, we'll go through some starter questions and then we'll get into some audience questions.
So just make sure that you have them, have those questions ready, and we'll the panelists go answer them as best we can. We hopefully have a good discussion about this, because that's kind of what's meant to be, is a kind of a discussion about these things, and then again starting out with a few things. So I guess we get started officially. So I'm Carlos Gonzalez from California. My co-presenter is
Amanda Fabian. I'm from Maryland.
Aha, we both sit on the Mesa USA curriculum committee, as it were, since we're virtually, we haven't met in person as a curriculum committee yet, but hopefully soon. And this is Navigating Uncertainty, and it's continuing your impactful work in Mesa. And we all know that this time was difficult, and more and more studies have been revealing how difficult this time really was. I found this quote from such a study, an article written on some studies, and I think it's really for all of us that have experienced it with students or with teachers or with both. We've seen it. We've seen that the going back to normal wasn't going back to normal really, and that the impact on the academic achievement on students was just substantial. And even in California, we've seen it in the assessments and everything like that. But also other impacts on mental health and on other things that are not as easy sometimes to measure, right? Teachers had a hard job before we even started. And now that, in this pandemic, and even as we continue to navigate this endemic, however you want to call it, the challenges are still there. And there are things that can't be controlled. But in spite of all of that happened and continues to manifest itself and happen, and the lingering impact on students, Mesa continues moving forward. These teachers and these educators continue to move forward, and it's just been remarkable what they've been able to do. And hopefully there's something that inspires us all as we navigate through this time. So we're gonna have this kind of agenda today again, not not too much stuff going on. It's the focus on the panel members on what they're gonna tell us. They're gonna introduce themselves. We have some prepared questions, and then we'll open it up to everybody. So that's kind of what's happening. So I guess we can have each panel member introduce themselves. Where they who they are, what they do. And in a few sentences, why Mesa matters, especially during this time. So, I guess Amanda, maybe your people could go first, perhaps.
Sure. Why don't we start with Danielle, and then we'll have Ray go.
Hi, my name is Danielle Stevenson. I am a middle school teacher at Patapsco Middle in Maryland. Did you want me to add anything else?
Oh yeah, why does Mesa matter?
Why does Mesa matter? That's the question.
Yes.
From an educator point of view, Mesa was an outlet for my kids and my students to be creative in a place where they were. It was very individualized, meaning that they were just by themselves in their schools, their homes. So for me, it was an outlet for them to get together and be creative and be innovative and showcase how they were being creative and innovative. So that's why Mesa mattered to me, and why Mesa always matters to me.
Thanks, Danielle. Ray?
Yeah, thanks, Danielle. My name's Raymond Lucas, and I'm not a classroom teacher, so I'm the county coordinator for the Mesa program for Howard County Schools in Maryland. And I come to Mesa from a very different perspective, not as an educator, but a consumer of the product that educators produce, because I was in industry for about 32 years. And so that product you produce are these wonderful students. And Mesa develops the skills that I was always looking for. And that's why Mesa matters a lot to me, along with the fact that there's so many lucrative and life-changing opportunities in STEM fields that Mesa prepares students for. And it's not just about the tech side. Mesa is structured so that, we've got students that go from not being able to look up from their feet to do a presentation to looking judges in the face and engaging them, defending what they've done. And so I've seen Mesa students progress to the point where I'd be glad to, from my past days, I'd be glad to be on the other side of the stage of a high school graduation and hire some of those students and send them to college if they wanted to go. That's what Mesa means to me.
Thanks, Ray. Thanks, Team Maryland. Now California.
All right, California. We have a team of teachers, and these teachers are work at the same school. So it's a wonderful project they have there for doing Mesa at their school as a team, as a group. So I think they have some great insights to offer. So I guess we could start with Anne. I think you're the most veteranish one of them.
Yes. My name is Ann Schreiner. I teach 8th grade science, history, and Mesa at Vineyard STEM Magnet in Ontario, California. We're a K-8 school, so we don't look like a traditional middle school. And Mesa matters because it's an opportunity for kids to shine who may not traditionally be successful with normal book learning, and get that hands-on experience and go through the engineering design process and find success in innovative and creative ways.
Thank you, Anne. Then we'll move down the line here. I got Mary here.
Hi, I'm Mary Timothy Nelson. I teach at Vineyard STEM. I teach 7th grade, and my Mesa class focuses on the EV3s and the coding. And why is Mesa important? As a teacher, I think, of course, it's important. You can just see it. But we've had students come back to us, and one of the things that they mention is that Mesa was the most fun, taught them the most, and the most recent student that came back at the end of this last school year, he is at Cal Poly Pomona, and he is majoring in aeronautical engineering. So they're doing things I don't know about. And so that's why it's important, because students remember it.
Wow. Thank you, Mary. And last and certainly not least, Tammy Lee.
Yes, my name is Tammy Lee Lake. I teach 7th grade math and Mesa. I've been teaching the Mesa elective for about 7 years. And one thing that I find that is important and why Mesa matters is because I've had students who struggle in their core classes, but thrive in Mesa. You can just see them get super excited when their project works, when they're able to do something and be successful at it. It builds their self-esteem, and it also builds my self-esteem because I actually developed skills that I didn't know I had, where I'm like, oh, hey. And so Mesa actually gives me opportunities to dive into things that I didn't think I was even going to be good at, and these kids, they hold on to it, like Mary says, and they really, it's a good opportunity for them to shine.
Thank you, and I'll shoot it back to Amanda to get the questions rolling.
Sure. So just so you will notice with the group of panelists that we have here is in Maryland, Mesa is traditionally an after-school club, but in California, it's an elective. And so depending on how your school might do it, Mesa, you'll notice, is very flexible. And it can be any of the above. It could be an after-school program, an elective. It could be a club, but that they hold during lunch. We've also seen that model. So when you're asking your questions, feel free to ask any of your questions, even if your model doesn't match California or Maryland, because they'll still be able to give you some good insight in there. All right, so we structured just a couple starter questions. As I said, the Slido deck is open, so feel free to type your questions in there, but we'll have the panelists start with these general first questions to get your minds thinking. So the first one is, what was the biggest challenge you faced running the Mesa Club during the peak of the pandemic? Why don't we start with a California person and then we can go to a Maryland person?
Sure.
Okay, that's me. So when the pandemic first hit at the end of that year, everything became pretty much independent study. And then we had a full year of teaching virtually on Zoom. So first off, we went from having class 4 days a week down to only 2 days a week on Zoom. So it cut our time in half. And then I'm sure as many of you know, when you're doing class on Zoom, you're not always seeing the kids. They're not participating in the same way. So for us, our Mesa class is very interactive. Kids are working, asking questions, talking to each other, testing. We're there to see what they're doing and ask them questions. And we didn't have that opportunity on Zoom. It wasn't the same with kids, cameras off, or even on a lot of their time during class, we were there to answer questions, but they're not all asking. So a lot of times we didn't even see their projects until they turned them in. And so that was a big challenge because we weren't able to have that same guidance along the way to see what they were doing as they were working on it. Materials was a big problem in our classrooms. We have open materials and tools, and now they're all working alone at home, and they had to improvise. They had to get a lot of the materials themselves, or we had 1 day a month scheduled at the school to come and pick up materials. And if they couldn't do that, then they were left to their own devices to get what they needed. So that was a challenge for sure. We also do a lot of collaboration. So when we're at school, we have students from the 6th, 7th, and 8th grade classes going back and forth to each other, asking other students, asking other teachers. And that obviously couldn't happen when we're on Zoom, although we did find ways to jump into each other's Zooms. And if we had questions, go and ask another teacher or have students help each other. And we did do that, especially with the coding. So that was good to include some of that collaboration still. Wi-Fi issues were a problem. If they didn't have the right connections, they weren't able to log on, they weren't able to get on the coding, which was all online. So we had to work around that. Fortunately, our district and our school were able to provide hotspots for kids, but sometimes there was a big delay in getting that to them. So virtual Mesa, we had to be super flexible and just to go with whatever we had at the time. It definitely was not the same Mesa program that we had been accustomed to doing in the years prior.
Thanks, Anne. Who would like to take it in Maryland? Either one.
I'll start from a teacher perspective just to give you that. So materials were definitely a struggle for us. So I was very thankful that our county provided us with materials and dropped it off at our school. And so then I went and I hand delivered them to one member of all the teams. And I had I had about 20 or 30 teams, so I had to go deliver them. I knew that it was important for me to go and make sure that every team had something. One of the struggles that I had was because we were on Google Meets, and I could put teams in groups, so I had multiple groups going on at one time. I couldn't provide them enough time that they needed that I felt I would normally have given them, because I could pop into every one of the Google Meets and talk with them for a little bit, and then I needed to go to the next Google Meet. So it really relied on a lot of independence from the kids. Another struggle that I had was I only had one set of materials for every group. And so they had to figure out how they could share them amongst the team. So some of the times it became very independent with, I'm working on this part now, and then you've got to wait. So with some of the platforms like the NEDC challenge, they could start to code stuff online. That was helpful because then they could code and work out some of the bugs that they had. But when it came to like actually implementing it on the device, I only had one per team. So I think those were probably the three biggest struggles that I had.
Danielle.
Oh yeah, Danielle, and I started to pick up some Uber business when I was delivering those supplies.
Nice. Thank you. All right. So question 2. How did you transition your Mesa class or your club from in-person to virtual? And what worked well and what didn't work well? Marilyn, you can go ahead and start. Ray, if you have insight on this, go ahead. If not, Danielle can pick it up.
Well, I would just say that one of the things that when I saw the kinds of difficulties that the teachers were having, one of the things I was thankful that Maryland Mesa had put together a lot of tips on virtual engagement. That was very, very helpful to especially some of the new teachers, because even with the pandemic, we probably added about 5 schools. And we had the benefit of actually growing this past school year. And but so those tip sheets were very handy. The older students I wasn't as concerned about because they some of them even set up governance operations where they had a president, a vice president, a master project manager where all the project managers reported to them. And those teachers smiled a lot. So because the students took that load. So my challenge was with a lot of the elementary school teachers, and especially the new ones. And because I see my job as removing obstacles so that Mesa can be done in an environment where it's not even the top priority. So the easier I can make that by not bugging them all the time for stuff that I could provide systems and tools for them to, communicate back and forth, or whatever I could do, whether it meant driving to school after school, which is probably different in my district than having to do that in New Mexico in terms of how many miles you got to go. Those were the kinds of things that I just felt were necessary to support the teachers so that they felt comfortable working outside of the thing that was their primary job, because Mesa clearly is a collateral activity.
Thanks, Ray. All right, California.
Okay, that'll be me. Initially, I was stumped when I started looking at projects and thinking, okay, wait, what do they need for these projects? Since we're transitioning into online. And then I thought, okay, let me look around the house. What do I have around the house? Is that the same thing these kids are going to have around the house? And then, just basic supplies. Luckily, we had a really supportive center. They offered what kind of materials you need. Vanessa was like, do you want help bagging them? I remember meeting her in the parking lot once just because we couldn't actually meet at school, but we had to do our little, exchange of supplies in the parking lot, to get supplies for the kids. planning and over planning became essential. Logistics, became imperative. You had to sit there and think, okay, when are we doing the project? What do we need time to set aside to pack the materials. We need time to set aside to pick up the materials. There was so much pre-planning and pre-logistics things that had to go into just one project, so it became a lot of forward thinking, which was also hard because schedules change. Things like, okay, you can do it this way today, but tomorrow you have to do it this way. And then so that was also having that flexibility of just saying, going with the flow, because things change from one day to the next. Something that did work well was our kids' video skills went through the roof. You started seeing animations, transitions, music being added. They had their tech skills really developed during this time. Their coding skills developed. Normally our kids would work in groups, but now they're forced to collaborate whole class. So you have this shy kid who might not want to ask the questions, was forced to see how to do something because a teacher or a student was doing a demo on Zoom, and so oh, I don't have to ask, I can just watch what they're doing and get those coding skills and say, oh, that was a space bar I wasn't supposed to put. Or they would see and they kind of talk out their problems. And like my coworker said, my colleague was saying, in the past, in person, I would just say, go to Miss Schreiner and ask her how she's doing this, or go see Miss Timothy and say, does this look right? Or ask Mr. Waters, because he was our building guru. But we couldn't do that on Zoom. So now it was okay, here's a Zoom link, join this person's Zoom. I'm going to let them know that you're joining, and talk to them and ask the student about, get help there. So although collaboration lessened, it also increased in a sense as far as whole group collaboration increased. But that was what didn't work, is our small group collaboration struggled. It was very hard in these small groups to really work well together. We would tell them, find a family member, or, find somebody, maybe a neighbor that you could work with, if you had somebody, because our kids, a lot of them lived in apartment complexes. So they actually lived next door to each other. But even that was a struggle for the kids to really have the time and the ability to kind of work together. So, our small group struggled. And then the last thing that was a struggle, and still is a struggle, is due dates. Trying to emphasize that you have a due date, and that you should stick to it, was very difficult for these kids, because at the same time, you're we're going to be flexible and we're understanding, and we know that you've got this going on and that going on. So just do what you can. But there's this due date. You still have to have this done by this day, and so it was hard trying to find that balance, even today I sit there and I think, okay, how do I find this balance with due dates with you guys? So I do little checkpoints, but even then it's not I penalize them. I'm oh, you didn't quite meet this checkpoint. That's okay. Just how about this checkpoint? But it's you keep putting the checkpoint back and back and back, and then eventually you're past the due date. Mesa Day was a week ago, so it's
well, it's hard to keep track of the kids, right? When you don't have them in person, and reminders, and because kids are notorious at procrastination and meeting out, and we have to have our dates, because just our centers, we have our competitions, right? We have
it's
to
a
do
part
our
of
thing.
life. Everything has due dates, right? I mean, so yeah, it's definitely an important lesson to be learned. So it's a struggle, but hey, I'm always open for suggestions.
Great. And so one more general one, and then I'll get to the questions that are coming through on the Slido deck. So how did you support your students during this time of stress and uncertainty? We'll start with California this time.
Okay, that would be me. So the stress and uncertainty weren't just for students, it was also for teachers. And it was brought up that schedules were hard to stick to, and that's because the teachers in our district went from, okay, you need to teach on campus via Zoom, to optional if you have approval for a medical condition or minors at home, to no one is allowed on campus at all. So that kept changing, and so getting materials for students kept changing. So the uncertainty was there for us. So what I made sure that I did was to keep calm through everything, as much as I could. So one of the important things I kept in mind was my demeanor online. And I never got upset. I channel it in a different way. So if there were glitches in the internet, if questions or my answers were being repeated to where you just want to pull your hair out, instead of getting upset, I just asked the students if they were pranking me, if they were recording this for a show or something to see if I'd get upset. Or I told them that if they were out shopping at any time, that they needed to get me wrinkle cream for all the wrinkles I get from the confusing looks on my face. So I tried to keep things light. Time is another thing that I gave, not just for assignments. I helped parents after their days at work, including nights and weekends. I truly felt that I had to be on 24/7, even if it would just give one student a little bit of respite, calm them down a little bit. We held open office hours at our school, whether it was for Mesa or for other classes. And many students just wanted to hang out, not even ask questions, just sit there and do their work because they needed that human connection. Our school with Mesa is big in working in teams. So they needed that. Another thing for time was Miss Schreiner, Ann Schreiner, and I had a Mars Rover Club, and NASA provided wonderful STEM activities leading up to the Perseverance landing. And then we had a watch party where students could bring popcorn, we could chat, or we could talk. I think there were a lot of space jokes being told. And so it ended up when our admin and other teachers heard about our watch party, some joined ours, and then some held their own in their classroom, but anyone was invited to do this. And the Rover Club met once a week. You can come to one meeting, no meetings, every meeting you could do the activities or not. So it was just another place where they could get STEM or Mesa type skills and human connection. For students, I usually do incentives in the classroom. It was challenging to try and think how to do this because they're still in school on Zoom. It's much more challenging. So one thing I did, every student got a punch card that looked like this, and I might randomly give a student a punch, and I kept track, and they had something physical. So it wasn't just something out there that they couldn't see. It was something tangible, and I thought that was important for them to have. So after 10, they'd get a prize that they could come pick up at school. Random gifts at the end of our trimester, that we would make them a bag with candy, little inspirational index cards, stickers with funny memes. So those were the different types of incentives. Another thing to help with their stress and uncertainty, because they didn't get that time in between classes or lunch breaks to just share, I allowed interruptions. So some of the most memorable ones were, there were students who had new siblings born. So of course they wanted to share their sibling with the class. The most memorable one is someone's pet chicken, and who could say no to someone sharing their pet chicken? So interruptions were allowed. We had special days like pajama day, stuffed animal day, Friday instead of Friday. And then the stress and uncertainty, a big one for them, I know, where's the food going to come from? And our school did hand out food, but I found a parent who lived in the neighborhood that knew other families, and she lived in one of the apartment complexes. We have a lot of apartments around us. And I text her, how many families need something? What do you need? And I wasn't feeding the school, but I made sure that there were some basics that were needed every couple of weeks. Run over to her house or her apartment, drop it off and leave, and we kept in touch with each other. So that could help. Lastly, every day I would remind myself that these students, while we were going through our own things as teachers, it was hard on us, but I tried to really, really keep in mind deaths in the family, job loss, financial and food worries, social and political unrest that sometimes cause fighting within the families that students would share with me. Students were responsible for their little siblings. They had to leave class to go help get a third grader online or something. And again, I made sure that, okay, I have to remember, leave some think time, which for students before I would go off the Zoom, because they can't just run back in the door and see me again, just 2 minutes later. It's like, once you're gone, you're gone. And those are some of the things that I and my team and our school tried to do to support our students.
Thank you. And Marilyn, somebody want to?
Sure, I'll start. One of the things I would agree is that time piece. I offered multiple days. So my Mesa team is a club that's offered after school. So we offered additional days after their traditional school hours to have Mesa, and then they could also have like any additional time that they needed, anytime they ever wanted to meet with us. One other thing that I made sure that they had was the resources that they needed. I think that was imperative, so that they weren't like, I don't even know where to begin. Like I gave them like, hey, start here. If you don't know where to begin, like make this your starting point. And then just tiny little goals here and there. Like I said, ours is a club, so it's not like a class that they take. It's just a club. So they meet outside of their school hours. So it was just an opportunity for them to de-stress, them to kind of think about something other than school, and then them also to get the kind of time that they needed to talk. But that's pretty much what we gave them. I don't know if Ray wants to add to that.
All right. Okay, so we have some questions in the Slido deck. So if you think of one, it's open, and I'll just go through them as we go. And if panelists want to answer, we have about 20 minutes left. So if panelists will keep their answers to maybe 2-ish minutes, that way we can get through questions. We can always go back and add to it if we run out of questions and have more time. All right, so this time we'll start with Maryland, but there's actually 2 questions that are pertaining to this that are about the same. And they're asking, did any of the planning or the adaptations that you made during the pandemic, are any of those changes going to go back when your clubs are back to like normal? If you're back in person, if you're back to just your normal schedule again, was there anything that you learned that you thought was so good that you're going to continue doing?
So one of the things that Mary had talked about was check-ins with them. So one thing that I initiated virtually is a entire Google Doc and Google folder that was shared with all of the members of the group that was also shared with me. And so we set milestones for them, and we set clear expectations of kind of like those deadlines and what needed to be accomplished. And that wasn't necessarily something that I had instituted before, because when we had our club meeting, I could go around to every single group and kind of keep a tally of where are you, what are your next steps, what are you going to do now? Whereas virtually, I didn't have that option to go in to make sure, because I had such limited time to meet with them. So that Google Doc I heavily relied on. And inside that Google Doc, it had, or Google folder, were all the resources that Mesa provides to us in the engineering and design booklet of like, what are the roles of everybody and what is everyone's jobs and responsibilities. And those weren't necessarily things that I had integrated purposefully before that, but because of the pandemic, now it's a purposeful decision of I need to make sure that I'm I have kind of an idea of who's responsible for what, who's doing what are their next steps, what are the resources that they need, and they could even communicate that with me. Another thing that I had, because I am a club and I don't have the opportunity for to communicate with them beyond an email. We use Canvas as our learning platform. I don't know if you guys are familiar with that, but we use like Blackboard. I don't know if you're familiar with that, but we use Canvas. And I had a class set up where I could communicate, set them into groups, communicate with the group. So I was consistently in communication with them, and those two things have been maintained as we've transitioned virtually into in-person. But that is two things that I've done.
Thanks, Danielle. California?
Sorry.
Go, Tammy.
Okay, something that I realized through Zoom, trying to help students problem solve when they're building was very difficult through a little camera. But with their video skills, they could record their project, in little mini steps. And I see the benefit, even going forward, having them do that, even in the classroom, so that we can look back and say, okay, here is what your project's doing. This is what it was supposed to do. Maybe, to help them do problem error analysis. And also because I can't be there every step, right? So sometimes I might be working with a different group or what have you, but this will help build that where they can start looking at their own projects and seeing, either where it's being successful or where it might need a little more help. So I think doing like little mini videos of each of their projects in each step will help them go forward for the next phase of the projects and help them learn, and go on from there.
Anyone want to add before we go from there? Go ahead.
Back real quick. The pandemic forced me to put everything on Google Classroom. And that has definitely stayed even now that we're in person, and just having all those resources available anytime they need it is great.
Oh, hey, Amanda.
Yes.
Maybe I should mention that one of the things that we learned, because one of the challenges we even had before pandemic was when we did in-person conferences or Mesa days, we did live judging, and then we had the challenge of getting the students back on the bus in time to get back to their schools. And so we've gone to virtual judging and a showcase where the awards are presented there with a showcase. And that's taken a lot of load off of teachers and staff in terms of, and also the judges that you bring in for a day, that if you give them, say, like a week to do the judging virtually, it takes a huge load off of that whole process. But it's key to still have that showcase. And I think we have one of the districts that learned that the advantage of that was the students got to go through the showcase of various projects, and the younger kids got to see what the older kids did in a more in-depth and personal way. So that's something that I think we're taking away from having to adjust to the pandemic.
Yes, what's Ray's talking about is we're doing this all through Maryland with all of our districts, that we're going to go with virtual judging from now on, and then just have the competition days be awards and showcase. So we'll see how that goes, but that has helped decrease the stress a lot on the judging aspect. So the next question is, I finished my first year as a Mesa advisor and I ran my program after school. How often during the week and what times did you host Mesa? Let's see, Marilyn, who started last time? Carol? So maybe Marilyn start this time?
For Maryland, for my club, and I know that Ray, we have to fill out a document of when we meet. I think most clubs meet 1 to 2 days a week. And then each time we meet for about anywhere ranging from 1 to 2 hours. So I'd say on average an hour and a half per session. But I feel like that's typical for all of our clubs, 1 to 2 days a week, sometimes more, and then about 1 to 2 hours a week. Would you say that's right, Ray?
Yep, that's about it.
In Maryland, we recommend, because we're after school, we recommend at least one 90-minute club meeting a week. But many clubs will find that depending on their structure of how they do after school clubs, some will meet twice a week, some will meet once, but almost all of the clubs start to meet a little bit more ad hoc when it's getting closer to competition time. The kids will just ask if they can stay after school, do some office hours or things like that. So most of the teachers are really flexible with allowing the kids to come and work on their projects a little bit closer to competition.
Yeah,
California,
I
Go ahead,
was
Ray.
just going to say, I was sent photos from one of the teachers showing students working on the porch, when it was high peak pandemic. They all had masks on and they lived near each other, and they were working on the porch. So as you get into the year, further into it, what happens is, they meet ad hoc, as often as they like. But for the teacher involvement, that's at least once a week.
Yeah, so I will say this about the clubs, or we even have in California Saturday academies where they meet on weekends throughout the year. I think the continuity it's important to have continuity, and obviously once a week is minimal, but as a Mesa advisor, as a teacher, you have to make sure that you have and it depends on when you can, depends on the students, depends on the school, but there has to be some level of continuity, predictable continuity, working with the kids. You have to see them often, and you have to be on top of what's going on. Because with a club, you want to continue to drive things forward still, even if you're not meeting as much as you are in a traditional classroom. But you have to continue pushing forward, and the only way to do that is to have something consistent, whether that be in person, online, or both. I think with the modalities we have now, we have no excuse for continuing engagement with students, because now we know how to do more online things and more virtual things. We can use those tools still, with our in-person tools as well. So you have to continue going with the kids, continue momentum with the students. I think, especially competition time is momentum time, right? Everyone's working on events, and they want to stay after school. They want to come in and odd hours, and unfortunately, a good Mesa advisor will say, "Sure, of course, I don't need to eat lunch today. Of course, I can hold it another hour. It's okay."
Nice. All right. So the next question is, how were you able to balance self-care with the challenges of doing Mesa under so much uncertainty?
What self-care?
Sorry.
No,
I was going to say, sorry, I forgot.
Trying not to be smart.
Go ahead, California.
That's a great question, because that is a really hard question. And I think sometimes I don't feel that Mesa prevented me from doing self-care. I think it was all the other stuff going on with schools during that time that prevented it, and our own stress levels. And even this past year, we weren't we're not totally out of it, and there still had to be a lot of changes. That's a difficult question, because at our school, it was brought up, we were given so much to do. So I don't really know if there was time for that. I tried to just turn off on the weekends as much as I could.
Maryland?
I concur. It was definitely turning off on the weekend, shutting the computer, not opening it up again, but then also secretly having it on your phone that you could reply back to messages. But I would say for me, I didn't find Mesa to be like something that I like dreaded doing. Like it was like something that I look forward to doing. And all right, tell me about what's going on. Like keep me up to date. What have you guys been working on? So like to me, that was a time just for me to like not think about school and not think about stuff and just enjoy just the kids' creativity and what they were thinking about doing and how we could brainstorm of everything. So I think that would be more along the lines of myself.
Can I add in a part to this question? How did you all help the students with their self-care? I know a lot of students were very overwhelmed with everything that was going on. And to give everyone, the Maryland situation is they were all virtual for the 1 year, but then last year it went in person and then it went back to virtual. And then then they started to do some in-person. Schools would have hotspots and they would go virtual. Every county kind of did their own thing. So there was almost more uncertainty this past year than there was the year before. So how did you help the students kind of make a path and figure it out for themselves because they don't have those same coping skills? Anyone can go for that because I added to it.
I think one of the teachers mentioned it. I don't know if it was Tammy or Ann, the fact that that you gave a lot of grace and you gave a lot of space for the students to express themselves, to go on tangents, and it was important to recognize what students were going through and understand. And even other teachers that I work with, they're successful because they care about their students genuinely, and they care about what's going on. Because it's harder for a student to compartmentalize things. It just is. Us as adults, we develop coping mechanisms for this, that, and the other thing. And even that is hard during this time. But for kids, and just that compassion that a lot of teachers showed during the time was just it went so far to be compassionate and to just recognize what's going on and to let things the teacher I talked to this week, what did they say? They let things go. They let things slide. They weren't punitive, as much as they needed to be, as they could be. They understood and they stood with the students. So I think just and one thing I will say about Mesa, I saw some good comments on Mesa. Mesa is, Mesa's beyond just our how can I put it? It goes beyond just this is our job. To be completely honest, it goes beyond that. It lets us care and see the great things in our students, probably more than maybe a traditional curriculum or classroom does. So I think that perspective, this position, saying that, this is awesome, this is great stuff for our kids, this is something that's helping them. I think even just that mindset and disposition, seeing Mesa in that way, will help you see your students in a different way too.
Yeah, there's no. I was just going to say there's no ambiguity about the outcome of the project, and that's what attracts the students to that, because you've got what you've got, and especially when they win, then then they're in a cloud. So
I think what helped the students the year that we were online, I think, I don't know, I hope it had something to do with myself and my team and teachers, but they were really respectful of one another. If there were some difficult subjects brought up, students would ask me in the chat first if it was okay to bring something up. So I'd introduce it and say, let's remember to be respectful. And I think that helped students too, because yes, it was a space for them to talk and hang out, but the environment online was also safe for them.
Thank you. All right, so we have time for one more question. If anyone has one, you can unmute yourself, write it in the chat, go to the Slido. Does anyone have another question?
A comment or anything?
Comment, anything? How much you love Mesa?
I'll make a comment. I appreciate what you said, Danielle, about enjoying doing the work to the extent that it didn't feel like work, because that's the environment that I work extremely hard to create for you guys, because you guys have the most daunting task of being a classroom teacher and then doing Mesa. And if it's not going to be easy to allow you to do that, then that's going to be a huge problem. And so any feedback you can give me that where I can keep that up, please do. Thank you.
So I know the teachers mentioned Vanessa doing these Breaking Bad type deals in the parking lot, with Mesa supplies. Look, I know I'll speak for a lot of our directors in California and staff. I mean, we did everything we could for our teachers. We bent over backwards. Sometimes probably did something that was against policy, but we did what we had. We did what we could to help. I mean, that's because we just like the empathy that as the class we have for your kids, we're feeling the same way about our teachers, right. Our competitions. We changed our competitions, understanding that we couldn't ask A, B, and C anymore for it. We were flexible in adapting competitions so that kids could do them, and so the teachers could, and even if that watered down the competitions, whatever, we did. For us, what was important is that the kids continue to engage in the stuff that Mesa was doing. That engagement was so pivotal for us to do our part in continuing student engagement, whether that be testing their boats in their own tubs or creating turning their kitchen into a Rube Goldberg machine. I don't know, whatever it took for the kids to continue to have valuable STEM experiences. Our attitude is we're going to do what we have to do.
Awesome. Well, thank you very much, panelists, for answering questions and talking about your experiences the past year. We should probably also shout out to the parents who allowed their kids to kind of turn their kitchens and their living rooms into science labs and things of, I'm guessing things got destroyed. So thank you very much for attending today. We just want to remind you that if you have general questions for the convening, the Padlet parking lot is the link to it. So if you put your question in there, the next link that you'll go to, the next, I guess, Zoom room is the closing for the day, and they'll answer all the questions that are in the convening parking lot there. So if no one has any other questions, we'll go ahead and say thank you and our goodbyes. And we hope you enjoy the rest of the convening, and those who are going to the competition at the end of the week. Good luck to your students, and we hope you have a good afternoon.